Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, your guest host for Point of View.
And welcome to Point of View. I'm Merrill Matthews with the Institute for Policy Innovation, sitting in for Kirby Anderson today. And of course, Point of View has always been based here in Texas. So we were part of the blackouts and the energy problems that we've faced here in Texas. So in this hour, we are going to talk a bit about some of the problems that happened here in Texas. In the next hour, we'll move to something else. In some ways, even more discouraging. We're almost around to tax time. April 15th, just around the corner. So we're going to go to a longtime Point of View friend, Dan Pilla, to talk about what you need to think about for taxes as we're moving up here. Last year was a really struggling year for many people. Some people did quite well. But what does that mean for your taxes as we come to April 15th? So in the next hour, we're going to turn to taxes. But this hour, we're talking about Texas and the energy problems that we had and what we know about it so far and where that may end up taking us. At my place, we live in the Dallas area, and we were part of the rolling blackouts that started, I think, late Sunday, went on for 3 or 4 days. I think power finally came on sometime Wednesday and stayed on. So we would have power come on at my house for 2 or 3 hours, and then the electricity would go off. Got no notice of when it was coming on or when it was going off. But when it went off, everything went dark. Fortunately, we have a gas fireplace there. We almost never use it, but we did this time. And so when the power would go off, on went the fireplace, and we were huddled up by the fireplace even at night because you didn't have many places to go in the house because it got so cold. But we were more fortunate than many people. Some people didn't have their power go off at all. Others, and especially in Austin, apparently had the power go off, and it was off for 3 or 4 days. I think Texas has mostly got that power re-engaged now, but there are problems with water as I think what I saw this morning is about 10 million Texans still under water boil notices. So, joining me to discuss this, longtime friend of mine, Dr. H. Sterling Burnett. Sterling, are you with me?
I'm here.
Thank you for joining us. Sterling, in 2014, Sterling joined the Heartland Institute, that's based out of Chicago. Prior to that, for 18 years, he was with the National Center for Policy Analysis. He served in a number of roles, including a member of the Environmental and Natural Resources Task Force in the Texas Comptroller's Texas Commission. He went to Southern Methodist University, got his undergraduate degree there, went to Bowling Green State University, where he got a master's and a PhD in philosophy and specialized in environmental ethics. And Sterling has long been my go-to person for discussing environmental issues, and we've got some environmental issues, Sterling. Well, as I mentioned going in, we were part of the rolling blackouts. Some of my friends did not have any problems at all. Others apparently have never, went for days without any electricity coming on. And then, of course, the other problem was the water. You had the issues of pipes breaking, and we had a little bit of an issue, not much, got it fixed fairly quickly, so we were generally fine. But I've had so many people, many friends, who've had their their floors flooded. We've seen pictures from people in apartments and others where the ceilings were flooded, and then the ceiling caved in and it went down on the floor, and it is just a mess out there. How did you fare during the rolling blackouts?
Well, my experience was similar to yours. The first day when we first lost power while I was asleep, I guess early Sunday morning.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's true.
And it seemed that the rolling blackouts were more of it was certainly a slow roll, because we had power for 7.5. We lost power for 7 hours. Then we'd have power on for about an hour and a half. And then we'd lose it for 7 hours again for the first day. The second day, it was more regular with, it was about 2 hours off, 2 hours on. And then the third day, we only lost power once. The temperature in my house got down to the 40s. I actually have a fireplace, but I hesitated to start it up because I haven't had the chimney cleaned in a while, and I didn't want to start a fire with soot and tar buildup. So we got out a blanket. I as you know, Merrill, I hunt, and a number of years ago, I shot a bison, and I had a blanket made out of its hide, and my wife hates it. She said she never wanted to see it. I have to keep it in the closet. But Monday night, she looked at me and goes, "Don't you have that buffalo blanket?" And sure enough, we slept under it, and it kept us warm. I now understand why people on the plains, if the snows hit, curled up under those blankets, because it kept us warm. We didn't lose water, though, and my pipes haven't burst, at least inside. My concern is I have a pool, mm-hmm. and it has an automatic pump to circulate the water. And during cold weather, if the water temperature goes below 40, it runs full time, because you don't want your water in your pipes freezing up, or your pump, or your filter. And it was working fine, of course, until the power went out. But when it was out for 7.5 hours, it didn't kick back on because the ice had formed. And so I'm a little concerned. My pool turned into an ice skating rink, and I'm a little concerned because I still have ice on part of the surface of my pool, and I'm afraid when I turn it back on, I'm going to lose the pipes out there and maybe the pool pump. But it was not as bad for me. You know, no one enjoyed shivering in the dark in their homes, but it was not as bad for me as for many people. As you know, some people lost their lives because mm-hmm. they tried to supplement their power with generators and didn't vent the generators properly. Carbon monoxide built up. Others lost their lives sort of enjoying the snow and the ice. Young boy lost his life to hypothermia after playing in the snow first time in his life. So it was a real experience here, and if not completely, largely avoidable.
I think that's right. And one of the things they're going to be doing in Austin over the next couple of months, the finger pointing started almost immediately as various groups, the governor and state legislators, began saying this is a failure and pointing fingers at others, whereas ERCOT, who manages the grid, and others started pointing back, saying, well, we don't have the power to enforce certain things. And it's going to take, I think, a little while for us to figure out, because there's multiple aspects to this. Of course, Texas has multiple energy sources. We have renewables with both wind and solar. We have natural gas, which is about 50% of the electricity generation. We have some coal and even a little bit of nuclear, but all of those seem to have faced struggles. So when we come back, we want to ask about why the rolling blackouts seem to be so varied in how they responded, because I saw many people who didn't get any power at all. And even though apparently the state was trying to be somewhat even-handed in this, it didn't work out for everyone. So when we come back, let's talk about that. My guest this hour, Dr. H. Sterling Burnett of the Heartland Institute, and we're talking about the Texas blackout. Stay with us, and we'll be back in just a minute.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
What are the key components of the free enterprise system in America today? Arthur Brooks, in his book, The Battle, describes 5 principles. The first principle is the purpose of free enterprise is human flourishing, not materialism. In this statement, he sets forth the moral case for free enterprise. He argues in one chapter that people flourish when they earn their own success. It's not money per se that's a measure. Instead, it's what Arthur Brooks called earned success. A second principle is that America stands for equality of opportunity, not equality of income. Arthur Brooks has found that non-Americans will tell you that Americans are the most egalitarian people in the world. Most of us believe that we should have similar opportunities, but also believe that we might end up in different places. A third principle is that we seek to stimulate true prosperity, not treat poverty. Arthur Brooks says that nearly every study of impoverished communities around the world show that prosperity, not poverty, is the right focus if we want to lift people out of poverty. A fourth principle is that America can and should be a gift to the world. Here is where we see a split in values. While some Americans see America as exploitative, most Americans believe that our country does more good than harm. And moreover, they believe that the nation has been a force for good in the world. And a final principle is that what truly matters is principle, not political power. Americans reject the pursuit of political power at the exercise of principle. Confidence in politicians in America is now as low as it was during the era of Watergate. You know, Arthur Brooks in his book explains how we can make the case for the free enterprise system, and these are key principles that we need to promote. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back. My guest this hour, Dr. H. Sterling Burnett of the Heartland Institute. He is an expert in environmental policy. He's also an expert in gun policy and gun issues, so we'll have him back sometime to talk about that. But Sterling, it's one of the things that happened is that you had many people who didn't get power for days, and it's not clear to me exactly why that happened. Now, some of the explanations we heard for those who never lost their power was they might have been on a line that was connected with a hospital or a fire station or something. I knew a few people. I know one person who was next to a fire station. He said he never lost power. That was a plumber, actually. So we know that may have been the case, but then other people didn't get any power, and this apparently was a big problem in Austin. And I saw, and it's even though low-income people are probably disproportionately affected by this, I saw an awful lot of high-income people. Dan Rather, remember Dan Rather? I saw a tweet from him saying he had gone for several days. He's apparently in the Austin area and did not get any power. But do you have a sense as to why some people didn't get any electricity at all during that time?
Well, I don't know that we know all the reasons for some of that. I have a friend over in Garland. I have several people in Garland that never lost power. I think it's the way, to some extent, that they did deregulation when they did it. The fact that Austin lost, so many Austinites lost power, as far as I'm concerned, couldn't have happened to a bunch of people, because they're the ones that largely created. They're the ones that largely created the problems we have. The legislature created this fiasco, set us up for it when the weather finally did hit. But places when they did the initial deregulation that set up Texas's competitive market, which has really worked pretty good. Mm-hmm. Municipalities that had municipal power systems, and there were several, there were a number in the state, they were exempted from competition. They were allowed to keep their own system as long as they didn't want to enter the competitive market themselves. And so Garland was one of those. And I haven't talked to everybody in Garland, of course, but the people that I know in Garland never lost power. Mm-hmm. Well, their system was not part of Encore or the ERCOT grid. They controlled their own. And theirs was coal and natural gas. They didn't have solar and wind. So, whereas Austin imported and San Antonio imported a lot of solar and wind. In addition, other places, I suspect it has to do with where power lines failed and transformers blew, servicing particular areas, which did happen. So there are probably a number of different causes for the way outages ran.
You brought up the renewable energy aspect, and my understanding is for wind, we have about 25% of our electricity generation comes from wind, about 3% or so from solar, maybe 4%. So that gets you about 30% from renewables. Natural gas, about 51%, coal, 13%, and nuclear, 5%. When this began, when the issues began...
Now, let's be clear. That's capacity. That's not the actual production. Wind
Explain
makes
the
up
difference.
25% of the state capacity. Well, if wind is blowing, your capacity is what you're rated for. So you might have a 2.5 megawatt turbine, and if it runs 365 days a year, you're getting a full 2.5 megawatts for the year. Mm-hmm. If it's only running 30% of the time, and it's rated at 2.5 megawatts, but if it's only running 30% of the time, which is typical, then you're far below your capacity.
I see.
What happened was, running up, first off, you got to understand how the renewable power got onto the grid in the first place. In 2009, there was hardly any wind or solar. Coal was 32% of the grid. Mm-hmm. And to get the deregulation bill and to get some Democratic buy-in, because they wanted to have it be bipartisan, Republicans cut a devil's bargain. They mandated, they put on their engineer's hat, because we all know those guys are engineers. And they said, we know best how to manage the electric system. We're going to require utilities to put intermittent power on the system. And so they set a certain amount of power. Then they upped the amount of power that had to be required to be put onto the system. That's regardless of cost and regardless of its impact on the reliability of the system. And then they subsidized it highly, both state, federal, and localities. You've got these school districts that they want to teach their kids to be green. And even as they're going crying to Austin for more funding, they're giving tax abatements to wind and solar companies to supply their power. So you got ever more percentage of the energy system dependent on power sources that depend on the weather. That's a poor way to plan a power system, is to plan a power system that depends on whether the sun is shining and very brightly or whether the wind is blowing between certain wind speeds. That's a bad way to design a power system. But that's what the legislator set up, both with taxes, subsidies. And so what happened was, much had been made about the fact that we didn't lose a lot of wind and solar power when the power failed. Well, that's true in one sense, because it had died 2 days earlier. Natural gas, coal, nuclear had to pick up the pace for the wind and solar that had died when the clouds first rolled in, but before the first snowflake fell, and the winds died off. So the turbines died. The solar panels weren't generating energy. Then the snow and rain, the snow and ice fell, covering the panels, so they're not going to generate any energy. And it froze the turbines because the genius wind energy people here in Texas didn't put heaters that they have on their heating systems that they have in northern states. Mm-hmm. Well, that would have added to their costs and cut into their profits.
There was also an issue with natural gas, though. And some of the, as I understand, the natural gas pipelines froze up, or some aspects of it, and they were having trouble getting the gas to the power generation stations. Is that correct? And coal too, I think, had some issues.
What happened was initially coal, natural gas, and everyone picked up the pace. So they made up for the fact that wind and solar had gone offline. And that worked for 2 days, but after it got extremely cold, some of these systems weren't weatherized. So natural gas, as you said, the pipelines froze. You had some breakages at some of the power plants. And at the same time, because of contracts, some of the natural gas was being sold out of state. So the governor put an end to that. And they brought some mothballed coal back online to get the power back on. Mm-hmm. So there were multiple failures, but had we not lost tens of thousands, thousands of megawatts of coal power, reliable coal plants, even if one of those coal plants had gone offline entirely during the cold spell and the snow, you would have had 3,000 or 4,000 more megawatts of power to provide to the system, of baseload power. That's, you have to understand how a system works. You've got two types of power, base load and peaking power, and wind and solar don't serve to satisfy either one of those. Right. A week before the outages, wind and solar were providing 58% of the energy to the power grid. Why? Because they could bid in to the system for below cost. They don't have to make a profit because they get so much of their payments from the government in the form of tax credits, subsidies, production tax credits, 50%. So they can sell power at less the cost that it takes to generate it. What other power plant can compete with that? None of them. So they're closing, and yet they're the reliable ones. They're not dependent on weather. It's a crazy way to design a system.
It is, and I think we'll find out more about that. Hopefully, I mean, there may be some clarity, but when you get politicians deciding to address a problem, you get an awful lot of grandstanding, some confusion, and oftentimes some overreach, which creates even more problems. And of course, then all the lobbying groups jump in there to try to say either we want more funds or don't attack us. So we'll have to see. This has become I suspect, the state legislature's key issue now. Other things that were going to be priorities are probably going to be put aside. My guest for this hour, Dr. Go ahead, Sterling.
By the way, address a problem that they created. Remember, they often see a problem, address it, and create an even worse problem. And then rather than saying, well, maybe we better live with the problem we had before, they keep fiddling with it and making it worse and worse constantly.
My guest this hour, Dr. H. Sterling Burnett of the Heartland Institute. If you want to know more about Sterling, you can go to Point of View website, pointofview.net. We've got his bio up there and so forth, so you can find out more about him and the Heartland Institute from there. And when we come back, we're going to look at some of the other issues that were facing the state and what we might want to do to try to address the problems so this does not happen again. Stay with us.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @Point of View RTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, your guest host for Point of View.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm Merrill Matthews with the Institute for Policy Innovation, sitting in for Kirby Anderson today. And we're talking about this historic power outage that happened in Texas and the problems surrounding it. My guest for this hour, Dr. H. Sterling Burnett, who has a PhD in environmental philosophy, environmental ethics, and is my go-to person for all things on environmental issues. Sterling, one of the things that has come up in all the news articles is, well, Texas has tried to introduce a free market into the electricity generation system, and that's the real problem is you're trying to bring a free market in here. This needs to be government controlled. It needs to be run by the government. You can't let markets work in this. Though there was an article from one of the columnists in the Dallas Morning News on Sunday where he talks about the benefits of Texas. He says, in the midst of all this discussion, he said, let's remember a few things. Texas has added more power generation than any other state. He says that the Texas leads in by creating new power generation. Since 2001, Texas has added about 30% of power generation, whereas for the country as a whole, about 8.3%. Texas has the lowest electricity rates. He says the current average about 8.6 cents per kilowatt hour, whereas the national average is about 10.54 cents. And so it is considered that Texas, up till now, at least, was considered one of the models of one of the best working electricity grids and power generation in the country. And of course, there's also the criticism that Texas doesn't cross state lines. About 90% of the power comes from the grid in Texas, and we don't cross state lines, in part, as I understand, because they wanted to avoid federal regulations. If we don't cross state lines, the feds can't come in and monitor us and regulate us. So what is your thought about the free market system that Texas tried to institute about 20 years ago?
Well, it was largely a free market system, but it was a quasi-market system because even with the market portion, they mandated particular types of energy be used as opposed to letting the market decide. That's what a market does, is the public decides through their purchases in the market. That's not exactly what happened here. But they did let prices fluctuate. They did build power. And, of course, at least initially when the market system arose, my power prices went down considerably.
Mine as well.
For the first 5 or 10 years. My prices started to rise, however, as more and more wind and solar was added to the system, and coal plants, which were the cheapest or second cheapest source of energy, began to go offline. Now prices are tagged largely to natural gas prices. And, of course, what happens if you start banning pipelines and banning fracking or reducing it because the price of natural gas is so low, that sounds good until you got an emergency and all of a sudden the prices of natural gas spike and everyone's electric bill spikes. Unless, of course, you did a lock-in rate like I did. I hope that holds up because I do lock in my rates. I buy plans that run from year to year or even 2 years if I can, even if I'm willing to, because I'm willing to pay a little bit more than most people are paying going month to month to avoid kinds of spikes like this. So it has worked well, and I think it's my belief, based on the evidence, that it would have continued to work well even during this outage had they not, at the same time as opening the market up to pricing, then mandated a particular form of energy regardless of the price, and then subsidized that form of energy, which is wind and solar.
1-800-351-12. Let me give the numbers here, Sterling. 1-800-351-1212. 1-800-351-1212. If you'd like to call in and let us know about what's happened with you, or if you have a question for Dr. Burnett, feel free to give us a call. We're opening the line, so feel free to call us and let us know what happened there. So, Sterling, go ahead.
Well, let's talk about solar for a second, because it doesn't really make up much of the Texas capacity, about 3%, like you said.
Right.
Most of that is rooftop solar panels, and probably in the last few years, I've gotten these robocalls constantly trying to get me to add rooftop solar panels to my home, and I just refuse because I don't believe in government subsidizing my energy use. But a lot of people are taking it up. We probably have tens of thousands, maybe 20,000 or so rooftop solar panels. Not panels, but rooftops with solar panels. So they actually have a weird impact on the grid that no other source of energy does, and they're subsidized in a way that no other source of energy does. Not only are the rooftop panels themselves subsidized, but because they work both ways. Mm-hmm. They supply power to the house, but when there's excess power generated, they sell it back to the grid.
Right. And
they want to be treated just like wholesale generators. So they sell back at wholesale rates, but they buy at retail rates. So if we're subsidizing them that way, secondly, we subsidize the equipment because they need special equipment to work both ways. Normally, whether it's even wind, coal, natural gas, they sell them to the grid. You're not selling power back to them. They're not taking and delivering power. These things do. And so let's say all 3% of rooftop goes offline. That's actually a 6% swing because at one time they were producing 3% of the power and they weren't taking power off the grid. And all of a sudden you've got to adjust to a 6% swing because their power goes off and now they're taking power from the grid. It's like introducing a new source to suck up power very quickly. And so you've got all sorts of problems when you introduce power supplies that the market would not have introduced otherwise.
Let's talk about another issue here because virtually every major media article I saw wanted to make the case that this is simply climate change happening. And
yeah, it doesn't matter what it is, it's climate change. If it rains more than average, then it's climate change. If it rains less than average, then it's climate change. If it's hotter than usual, well, we call it global warming, then it's climate change. And if it's colder than usual, despite it being global warming, it's climate change. That's the beauty of the theory of climate change. No matter what's happening, you blame it on climate change. And the climate's always changing.
What was interesting about this was they're saying this is an example of the extreme weather events that come with climate change. And so I went and looked because Texas it's not common, but we do get cold weather here.
Yep. We've had, in the last 100 years, we've had multiple times where you've gone over 100 hours straight with below freezing temperatures. You've had at least one time before this where you had 200 hours of below freezing temperatures. So it's not unusual, but what the data shows from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, they keep these records, is that extreme cold has been declining. So this isn't climate change. They also show, by the way, that droughts are declining, that hurricanes have declined on average over the last 100 years, and even wildfires. You hear a lot about wildfires. They've declined. So it's hard to blame extreme weather on climate change as if it were making things worse when all the data shows it's actually either the weather has become more stable or declined in severity and frequency of extreme weather events. And then what do you do about California? California is one of the most regulated systems in the country. They have the highest energy prices, and they still have outages. In fact, their outages aren't rare. It's seasonal. You can count on having an outage in California, a modern electrical a state in a country that has a modern electrical system, but you can count on it. Every summer they're going to have blackouts. And what's the difference between California and Texas and many other states in the nation? Well, they're adding more and more wind and solar constantly and shutting down all other power sources.
There was an AP.
And then they have to.
There was an AP article looking at this, and then they called it an explainer. But the reporter went down and said, now one of the differences between Texas and California is that California believes in climate change, and so they are preparing for things like this so that they don't have that happen. And I thought, does this reporter, is this a serious person? Do they not look at what happens to California so often?
They prepared so well. Theirs doesn't happen once, like I said, it's happened in the past here, but never on the scale that we've had this time. But it has happened in the past. They don't happen in the past. You can count on it every year. Come summer, they're going to have outages, planned outages. They called it planned rolling blackouts. And they actually had to approve contra California law. They had to issue a special dispensation last year to allow people to use generators because they use nasty fossil fuels.
Hold on to that thought. We'll be back in just a minute.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to our final segment with Dr. Sterling Burnett, as we're talking about the power outage in Texas. And Sterling, just because they're saying this was a radical, extreme change that happened because of climate change, I went and looked to see what the National Weather Service said about that under sort of historic temperatures in Texas. And people can go to the National Weather Service and Google the coldest nights in Texas, and you should be able to find it. I'll have a piece at Institute for Policy Innovation tomorrow, which will have a link to that also. But from the National Weather Service, it talks about some of the, it goes through and lists the 17 largest cities, the coldest night in Texas in the 17 largest cities. And so we hit -2 degrees on early Tuesday morning of last week. But the National Weather Service says the coldest night for Dallas area was -8 degrees back in 1899. And it goes on to say the lowest temperature ever recorded in the state of Texas occurred at Tully, I guess it is, in Swisher County in the extreme southern Texas panhandle. I'm reading from them. The thermometer dropped to 23 degrees below zero. However, there were unofficial reports that were even colder. Low temperatures of 30 degrees below zero were measured that night in Wolf Creek at a site southeast of Perryton, both in places. And it also says that there were reports that Galveston Bay had largely frozen over. And the year we're talking about here, the coldest night, 1933. 1933. Of those 17 cities and their coldest nights, I looked on this, only 4 of them were since 1950. So we do get cold here in Texas, and it happens not often, but it does happen. And it seems like it would be hard to make the case that this is a result of climate change when we aren't even, when very few of the coldest nights even came since 70 years ago.
Well, that's true nationwide. You can go to the Weather Service data and look nationwide. 40% of looking at hot weather records, 40% of the hot weather records occurred before 1960 in this nation. Only 2 states have set heat records, hot temperatures since 2000. There were more than that in the 1890s alone. There were 3. So it's really hard to say whether it's getting more extreme and whether it's cold or hot due to climate change, because 100 years of climate change ago, the 1930s were the hottest century as far as the number of states setting heat temperature records. That's held up. That's held up for 90 years now. So it's crazy. But for a second, let's look ahead, because you've talked about you mentioned what could be done.
Right. What can be done?
Let's talk about what last legislative session in Texas, a legislator, I forget which legislator, but one of the legislators offered a bill that would make wind and solar pay some of the cost of keeping redundant power online, like the other power plants had to do. If you're a coal power plant and your plant's going to go offline for routine maintenance or for fueling, they have oil boilers on site. They have to pick up the slack, and they have to pay for that. Wind and solar don't pay for the redundant power, the power that regulates their flow day to day. They don't pay for that. So you have to run a power plant inefficiently, sometimes at a loss, just to keep the power flow going. And the people that the reason that's required is the wind and solar, and yet they're not paying for it. So he offered a bill, and it was killed. So I suspect that bill will get some more serious consideration this session. What Biden and company want to do nationwide, though, is give us California nationwide. They want to add more wind and solar. They want to get rid of fossil fuels, the use of fossil fuels by between 2030 and 2050, and make us more reliant on electricity generated by renewable power. At the same time, they want all of our appliances and cars to be electric. He wants to electrify the entire vehicle fleet. Can you imagine? I guarantee you, no one was getting their car charged during this cold spell. Every year, cars fail in California because they're not getting charged when they shut off the power. And now they want to shut off, in many states and cities, they want to shut off natural gas. So you can't have new natural gas hookups. So then you won't even be able to cook during these power outages. Do you really want to make more people more dependent on electricity for their transportation? Emergency vehicles aren't going to work. And does Biden really want to electrify the FBI's and the Secret Service's entire fleet? U.S. Marshals' entire fleet, and so someone's running away, and your car runs out of a charge. Well, we've got these emergency chargers. They only take 30 minutes. Well, okay. Good luck with that.
I did a piece.
It's crazy.
I wrote a piece a few years ago when Boston had so much snow that it was just piled up everywhere, and the machines were going 24 hours a day trying to just get it to the side. And of course, on something like that, and they had been talking about trying to move to all electric vehicles for the city, and you can't do that in that case. I mean, you had fossil fuel driven machines that could continue 24 hours a day. You can't do that if you have electricity.
Well, and Boston is a beautiful example because they're one of the cities that wants to ban new gas hookups. And at the same time, I suspect it was the same year that you're talking about. Massachusetts won't allow any new pipelines built into their state or across their state to other states. They're blocking all natural gas pipelines. At the same time, when they had that cold weather 3 years ago or 4 years ago, they were importing natural gas from Russia. They say Trump was in Russia's pocket, but the governor of Massachusetts and the mayor of Boston was in Russia's pocket because they were sending them billions of dollars to keep the power and the heat on in Boston during cold weather because they won't allow U.S. natural gas from nearby West Virginia and Pennsylvania to go flow there.
Take about 30, 40 seconds to just talk about what your preferred solution would be. You mentioned the state legislature that introduced legislation that didn't go anywhere, but if you were doing this, what would you do?
Well, the first thing I'd do is I'd cut all the subsidies now. I'd say, guess what, folks? We made a mistake. We're no longer going to mandate renewable energy, and we're no longer going to subsidize renewable energy. And if these companies came to count on subsidies, that's sort of too bad for them, because we shouldn't have been giving them in the first place. They've made their money. If they can survive in the market, then they stay. Maybe they need a capacity factor to say we're going to make sure some coal plants stay online, even if they aren't in a free, in the market as it is now. It's not a free market, but in the market as it is now, even if they are money losers most of the time, they're critical, and so we're going to make the wind and solar subsidize their continued operation. What I don't think we should do is buy into the federal system. I certainly, I don't know if you know this, but Biden refused. He signed an executive order saying, we'll allow them to open up some dirty power plants if prices reach $1,500 a megawatt hour and if the EPA approves. Well, of course, as you know, spot prices reached as much as $9,000 per megawatt hour, outrageous. Biden only wanted him to have to go up 2,000%.
Sterling, we're going to have to end it at
before
that.
He'd allow it.
We're running out of time. My guest for this hour has been Dr. H. Sterling Burnett of the Heartland Institute. You can find out more about him by going to pointofview.net, and you'll be able to find information about him, the Heartland Institute, and ways to reach out to him. Thank you so much, Sterling.
Thanks for having me on.
And when we return, we're going to turn to taxes. So Dan Pilla will be joining us to talk about the tax issues we'll be facing. So you don't want to miss that. Stay with us. This is Merrill Matthews sitting in for Kirby Anderson on Point of View.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/sign-up. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/sign-up. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, your guest host for Point of View.
And welcome to Point of View. This is Merrill Matthews with the Institute for Policy Innovation, sitting in for Kirby Anderson today. And for this hour, we are going to turn to taxes. April 15th, about, I think, probably 7 weeks away. And so people are beginning to prepare their taxes if they haven't already filed them. But last year was such a strange year for so many people. We wanted to go to Dan Pilla. Dan has been a tax expert and working in this area for, I think, 3 decades or so. Point of View has had him going on the show going back to the 1980s, I believe. Dan is our go-to person on taxes. Dan, are you with me?
I am here, Merrill. How are you?
I'm doing well. How about you?
I'm very well. It's good to talk to you again, my friend.
Of course, we're in Texas where we had power outages, and people are saying, well, it gets cold here in Texas, but I think you're in Minnesota, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm in Minnesota, and when we had it, the weather's actually broke nicely here now. We're in the mid-30s here today, but we had negative 20 below zero weather. In fact, it was even more cold than 20 below. But we had that for about 5 days straight, and then we had below zero for about a week and a half. So it's been doggone cold here.
Well, some of that weather made it down to Texas and created a lot of problems for us. Thankfully, it has gone back up to your area and maybe even back up into Canada.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, anyway, Dan has written, I think, 14 books now and covered a range of different areas. One of his latest ones has to do with small businesses and things that they need to consider about tax issues. But Dan, before we get started on that, you have been highlighting some of the issues that the IRS has in a recent piece that you wrote for World National WND. I can't remember what it was off the bat. We have WorldNet Daily. I drew a blank there. But you wrote a piece about your concerns about the IRS, and especially with groups that are expressing their opinions. And, of course, this goes back to the Obama administration, where the IRS was apparently giving especially 501c3s and C4s a hard time about getting their tax approval status. What's your concerns now?
Well, yeah, you're exactly right, Merrill. And in fact, this goes way back, even before that. It goes back to the early 1970s when Richard Nixon used the Internal Revenue Service to target his political enemies. And so what has happened here now recently in the wake of the January 6th riot in D.C. is leftist Democrats, Merrill, have undertaken to weaponize the Internal Revenue Service against conservative, freedom-thinking, tax-exempt organizations. And the allegation that was made by Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon to the Commissioner of Internal Revenue Service in a letter that Wyden wrote to the Commissioner on January the 15th, he makes the statement that, and where he gets this information, Lord only knows, but he makes the allegation that his phrase, not mine, dark money coming from the Republican Party was used to finance the riots in Washington, the riot singular in Washington D.C. on January the 6th. And he takes the position that this money is being funneled through conservative tax exempt organizations, and he wants the Internal Revenue Service to actively target these organizations for ongoing audits and very specifically, and these are very clear statements in his letter, to revoke their exempt status and put them out of business. Now, the "put them out of business" phrase is his words, not mine, Merrill. So what they want to do is this is just another step in the string that we've seen here over the last probably 6 or 7 months of active and vociferous attacks on opposition opinions. And that's what it's all about, is silencing the opposition.
Now, Dan, refresh my memory here, but it seems to me, if I recall correctly, back in the summer, we had riots going on in various cities around the country, including Portland. That would be Senator Wyden's state. It belongs in his state. And there were discussions about dark money flowing around then, because you had a lot of people who were doing various things. And the question was, where are these people getting this funding from? And I don't recall Senator Wyden or any other Democrat at the time saying we need to find the sources of this dark money, because they didn't even agree that those were riots in many cases.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And of course, you point out just a couple of minutes ago that I'm from Minnesota. I live in the Twin Cities area.
Yes.
This whole insanity, in 2020 started on May the 26th, plus or minus May the 26th in Minneapolis. A 4-mile stretch of Lake Street, Merrill, in Minneapolis, a very major artery, east-west artery in Minneapolis, 4-mile stretch burned virtually to the ground. There were about 67 or 68 buildings that did in fact burn to the ground, and more than 1,500 buildings that were damaged either by fire or smoke or vandalism, broken windows and looted goods and so forth from the buildings. None of that was even called a riot, never mind questions of dark money coming into the Twin Cities to bring these people in and, Merrill, get them out of jail. And it's come to light now that Vice President Harris was giving money to an organization and encouraging others to give money to an organization that was bailing these people out of jail. So I don't understand why that's not an issue in our news here, and people understanding that these riots, and we're talking about city after city that was burned, and in Portland, you talk about that, it was going on for months at a time, unended. Where's the scrutiny on those organizations?
If I remember right, organizations, I think I saw articles in the fall that Black Lives Matter and a few other organizations were just being swamped with money, so much they didn't know what to do with it all. Some of that was legitimate money coming from corporations and individuals and so forth, but some of it, I think, was probably what you're calling dark money, and you kind of wonder who's funding this money and where's it coming from and what's the purpose behind it.
Yeah, what are they doing with it? That's the question I want to know. What are they doing with the money? And I don't, it's of course at some point, Merrill, it'll come to light. I mean, we know Scripture tells us that what's done in private is going to be shouted from the rooftops. So we're going to know at some point, sooner or later. But in the meantime, it's that the hypocrisy is so thick you can cut it with a knife.
It is indeed. Well, Dan, when we come back after the break, 2020 was a rough year for a number of people. They may have thought they were getting a certain amount of money coming in income, and they didn't get it because they were laid off or other issues there. Others had money coming in from the stimulus checks and other things of that nature. A number of businesses were barely able to hang on through that time, and many closed. We see a lot of them that have closed. And of course, the federal government's trying to step in and provide some extra money. So 2020 is going to be, I think, a challenging tax year for many people, both because of some did well and some did not do well at all. So when we come back from the break, I'd like you to discuss some of the issues that people are going to be facing in the tax issues. Of course, last year they actually got an extension. We didn't have to do something and do that until July the 1st. I don't think they're changing that this year. But get some thought to what the listeners need to be thinking about, both individuals and small businesses, that they need to be concerned about as they prepare their income taxes. My guest for this hour, Dan Pilla, extraordinary tax person who has been following this for years and years, and our go-to person on that. Stay with us. We'll be back with Dan Pilla in just a minute.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
What are the key components of the free enterprise system in America today? Arthur Brooks, in his book The Battle, describes 5 principles. The first principle is the purpose of free enterprise is human flourishing, not materialism. In this statement, he sets forth the moral case for free enterprise. He argues in one chapter that people flourish when they earn their own success. It's not money per se that's a measure. Instead, it's what Arthur Brooks called earned success. A second principle is that America stands for equality of opportunity, not equality of income. Arthur Brooks has found that non-Americans will tell you that Americans are the most egalitarian people in the world. Most of us believe that we should have similar opportunities, but also believe that we might end up in different places. A third principle is that we seek to stimulate true prosperity, not treat poverty. Arthur Brooks says that nearly every study of impoverished communities around the world show that prosperity, not poverty, is the right focus if we want to lift people out of poverty. A fourth principle is that America can and should be a gift to the world. Here is where we see a split in values. While some Americans see America as exploitative, most Americans believe that our country does more good than harm. And moreover, they believe that the nation has been a force for good in the world. And a final principle is that what truly matters is principle, not political power. Americans reject the pursuit of political power at the exercise of principle. Confidence in politicians in America is now as low as it was during the era of Watergate. You know, Arthur Brooks in his book explains how we can make the case for the free enterprise system, and these are key principles that we need to promote. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we're back with our guest this hour, tax expert Dan Pilla. If you want to find out more about Dan or reach out to him, you can go to his website, taxhelponline.com, taxhelponline.com, or you can go to Point of View. We have information about Dan there, plus a link to his website, so you can find out more or reach out to him either going directly to his website or going to Point of View and finding a link to that website. Well, Dan, what should we be thinking about as taxes are rolling around this year?
Well, I think the first thing that people need to understand, Merrill, and this is especially true for 2020 income, but it's been true for as long as I've been in this business, and that is this: people commonly make the mistake of believing that their unemployment compensation is not taxable income, and that's just absolutely not true. It's
very important
ordinary
point.
Yeah, it's ordinary income. It's treated just like any other wage income. And so now we've got massive numbers of people across the country that were getting pretty big unemployment checks here for a good long time during 2020. And some are still getting these checks, Merrill, as you well know. And so what's going to happen is now, okay, so you get these unemployment checks, and this is particularly true for folks that whose unemployment compensation is a fraction of what their regular wage was. So let's say you were making $5,000 or $6,000 a month, but your unemployment's only $3,000 a month. Well, okay, the $3,000 a month obviously is probably not enough to pay your bills if you're living on $5,000 a month, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so now did those people set aside a portion of that money to pay their taxes? I know what the answer is. I'm sure you do too. The fact is that the vast, overwhelming majority of people do not set money aside from their unemployment compensation to pay taxes because they need the money to live on. And so now we're going to have a serious rise, in my opinion, a serious increase in the number of people that owe money to the IRS come April, and it's going to be a problem.
It's a very good point. I was not aware of that. And of course, you have unemployment, but you also had the money that was coming out in the stimulus checks, the $1,200, I believe it was early on. They've Congress has passed some more money to come out. Was that stimulus check, is that taxable?
Yeah, that's a good question too, Merrill, and there's a great deal of confusion on that as well. And the confusion on that is the opposite. People think the stimulus, I don't know how this happens, but people think the stimulus check is taxable, and they think the unemployment compensation is not taxable. The opposite's true. Unemployment compensation is taxable as income. The stimulus check is not. The stimulus check, Merrill, was a prepaid tax credit, all right? So it shows up on your tax return as a credit, as if somebody else is paying your taxes for you. So it's not income at all in the traditional sense. It's a tax credit. It just so happened that the tax credit was prepaid in the form of a check mailed out by the federal government starting last year. And as you point out, a second round that was authorized in December that started coming out end of December into January. And now, who knows, is there going to be a third round? Of course, they're talking about that now as well. But these are tax credits, so they are not taxable income.
All right. Now, the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, spent thousands of businesses applied, mostly small, but there were larger businesses as well, applied for these, and they got money. Is that considered income for a business?
Yeah, that's a good question too, Merrill, because there was a lot of confusion about that as well. These Paycheck Protection Program loans are not considered income. All right, so it's a loan on the front end. So a loan, Merrill, whether you get it from the Small Business Administration through the form of a government guaranteed loan, or you get it from, the ABC Bank, or you get it from your brother-in-law, it doesn't make any difference. The loan proceeds are never considered income. All right, now, however, under normal circumstances, when you pay back a loan, the payment of the principal is not a deduction. The interest is, but the payment of principal is not. And under normal circumstances, if you don't repay the loan and the loan gets canceled or forgiven, then the difference between what you borrowed and what you paid back is considered income, because now you didn't pay the loan back. So now it is considered income. The Paycheck Protection Program changes all of that, right? So it's not income on the front end, but if you get forgiveness of the loan, you don't have to call that debt forgiveness income. So not only do you not pay taxes on the front end when you get the loan, you don't pay taxes on the back end when the loan is forgiven. And moreover, the business expenses that you pay with the money continue to be tax deductible. So in every way, shape, and form, Merrill, a Paycheck Protection Program loan is free money to the business as long as, and this is important, as long as the business uses the money as authorized by law.
So let's say I'm a small business and I've tried to stay in business, but the lockdowns and other things created so many problems for me. I had to shut my business down. So I paid some employees and maybe I gave them some extra money, but I've got to shut my business down. Is there anything there that's different about just a standard foreclosure for a company in any year that wasn't able to make it, but now from this past year, if a lot of businesses closed, is there anything different about that? Anything you can, any advice you can give them?
Well, in the context of a Paycheck Protection Program loan, Merrill, I would say if a business is on the threshold of shutting down, make sure you use the money as authorized by law. 60% of it has got to be used for employees, for payroll costs. 60% of the money has to go in that direction, and then the rest of the 40% can be used in a number of different ways, such as for interest on loans or rent on business equipment or facilities, utilities, operation expenses, some property damage costs. There's about 8 or 9 different categories where the money can be used. So understand that if you got PPP money left over, use it for those areas only, so that if your business doesn't close, you don't get stuck with having to repay the loan back. So that's the most important. Well, that's an important thing. Another very important thing, and this is true whether your business is in trouble because of COVID or for any other reason, you got to make absolutely sure, Merrill, that you're dealing, that you're paying your employment taxes. The trust fund taxes on wages paid to employees has to be paid to the IRS. This is where business owners get blindsided. I talk about this in a couple of different chapters in my book, Dan Pilla, Small Business Tax Guide, because it is such a common problem. And that is businesses that shut down owing trust fund money to the IRS. These business owners, Merrill, find out the hard way that liability can be assessed against the business owner personally, right? The IRS can pierce through a corporate veil, for example, or an LLC or a partnership. They can reach through all of that and assess these tax liabilities against the owners personally, and they can chase the money from their personal assets, such as their retirement funds or their automobiles or their wage income stream from their job, whatever it may be.
So we had a number of people who lost their jobs. We've got about 2.5 minutes left here in this segment. If I went in to borrow money from my IRA or 401k, and I'm not 59 and a half, so I don't get that tax-free break there from the government. What do I need to be thinking about if I had to borrow money from my IRA?
Yeah, a couple of things. First of all, the payback, or the rollover period, it was changed by the CARES Act. All right, that was the law that was passed back in March of 2020. So coming up on a year now on the CARES Act, and so there was a lot of changes that were made to the payback rules. So you need to keep that in mind. That the taxes are deferred for a period of time if you don't pay the IRA back. So that's another thing to consider. And then of course the penalties have been waived in certain cases as well. So what you need to do with that situation is before you take any money out of your IRA or your 401k, is sit down with your financial person to make sure that you are understanding what the rules are for paying back the money or incurring the tax liability and the period of time you have to pay the tax liability if you don't plan to pay it back.
My guest for this hour is Dan Pilla. He is a tax expert. He's been appearing on Point of View for decades, as long as I've been around here. He can answer your questions. If you're interested and you have a question for Dan, you can call us at 1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212. If you want to find out more about Dan, or if you want to reach out to him, you can go to his website, taxhelponline.com, taxhelponline.com. You can reach out to him there, or you can go to pointofview.net, and we have that link there for him. And in addition, a number of you may be just find yourself struggling financially because you haven't been able to make ends meet. Income didn't come in. You may not be able to pay your taxes that you felt like you were going to be able to pay. And so you may be facing a number of struggles. So feel free to call Dan now, 1-800-351-1212, or reach out to him on his website. When we come back, we want to find out more about what we need to be facing in this difficult time right now, especially for many people who just didn't know they would be looking at this kind of year that they had in 2020, whether or not they need to be making some changes for 2021 and what that might mean for them going forward. So stay with us. This is Merrill Matthews sitting in for Kirby Anderson. We'll be back with Dan Pilla on Point of View in just a minute.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View radio talk show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @Point of View RTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, your guest host for Point of View.
And welcome back. This is Merrill Matthews with the Institute for Policy Innovation, sitting in for Kirby Anderson today. And Dan, let's go to Judy in California. She has a very interesting question I think other people will be interested in. Judy, you're on the air.
Thank you. I have a life insurance policy for around $120,000. And a few years ago, I took a loan of less than $9,000, but it's $9,000 now. And I took a loan so I wouldn't have to pay taxes on the money I took from the policy. The company is now telling me there's like $37,000 extra above the original value of the policy that I have earned. And so I asked them, I've asked several of their agents, if I take $9,000 out of that $37,000 and pay off that old loan, am I going to have to pay taxes on that $9,000 as if it was income?
Well, Judy, let me stop you there. And I hate to do this to you, but I can tell you this insurance area is way out of my scope of expertise. What I deal with specifically is IRS problems, folks that are facing problems with the IRS audits, collections, money they owe and can't pay, that sort of thing. This type of question, you got to sit down with your financial planner, Judy, as somebody that understands this insurance business and can work through that with you to give you a clear answer on how to deal with that.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Judy. But it does raise an interesting question to me. People borrow money from their life insurance policies. Most people have term insurance now, I think, but there's some who still have what we used to call whole life policies. If you borrow that money because of the pandemic and you just needed to get some money, are there any tax implications for that?
Well, the short answer, Merrill, is anytime you borrow money from anybody, the loan is not considered taxable income. The loan would only become income. The amount of the loan would constitute income only if the loan was canceled. So, for example, if you borrow $20,000 from the bank and you pay back $5 of it and $15 gets canceled, now that typically, under normal circumstances, that $15,000 would be considered cancellation of debt income. Now, there's all kinds of exceptions to that rule as well. And in fact, I wrote a whole book on that issue, how to eliminate taxes on debt cancellation, because during the late the last decade here of 2020, starting in 2008, 2009, 2020, that period of time, there were millions of people, Merrill, that were losing their homes because of the housing crisis that arose during that period of time. And there was literally 5 to 6 million foreclosures per year on residential housing across the United States, and that continued into 2012, 2013. So there was millions of people across the country that were fighting this problem with their banks losing their house, and then the IRS comes behind them and says, "Oh, you've got all this income tax liability now on this canceled debt," which of course just blindsided people. And so we're dealing with that situation all the time, and still to this day we're seeing that go on.
1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212 if you have a question for tax expert Dan Pilla. And Dan, let's go to Martha in Arizona, who has another question I think may affect a number of people. Martha, you're on the air.
Hi. So I was one of the lucky ones that did receive 2 COVID checks, but I had a life change during this whole time. So the first check that I received, I was going through divorce, but it wasn't finalized. So I used the COVID payment, the other half of the COVID payment, to make his half, to make payments on debt. But then recently I got another check because we filed taxes at this bank account, and I can't give that money back. I don't know what to do with it. What the bank told me was,
are we talking about an economic impact payment? Are we talking about a PPP loan? You're talking about the economic impact payment, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, well, the economic impact payment doesn't carry with it any requirement to use the money for this purpose or that purpose. It's only Paycheck Protection Program loans that require that the money be spent in particular ways according to the statute. As far as an economic impact payment, the $1,200 stimulus that was started going out last April, and then the $600 additional stimulus that started going out in December into January, you can use that money for anything you want to use it for. It's a tax credit. It doesn't carry with it any strings as far as spending the money or any requirement to give it back if you don't spend it in a particular way.
Even though I'm no longer married and it was
even though.
Oh.
So what's going to happen? Well, here now. Listen to me now. On your tax reform, you see what I'm thinking about, Merrill? I'm always thinking about this. It all comes out in every sentence. On your tax return, ma'am, there's a line on the return that will walk you through the process, that will allow you to claim the credit if you didn't receive it. In your case, you got it, so you wouldn't claim the credit. But there is also a worksheet with the tax return instructions that walk you through whether you have to give any of it back because of a change in your marital status. Okay, so that may have an impact. That's possible, and that form that goes along with it will walk you through the process of figuring that out.
Okay. Thank you very much.
All right, you're welcome.
Thank you, Martha. Dan, the Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, provides subsidies for people. If you remember, when you go and you apply for that, you sort of estimate what your income is going to be, as I recall, and then it gives you a subsidy based upon that. There are, even though we're talking about some people many people who earned less, some people may have earned significantly more. If you worked for Amazon and Amazon needed you working additional hours, or you worked for a grocery store, let's say, and they needed you in because of so many struggles that many of these essential businesses had. How do you deal with that? Because the discussions we had in the past was, if you came out and you said, well, I'm going to make, I'll pick a figure, $40,000. Here's my subsidy for the Affordable Care Act for my insurance. It turns out that I ended up making $60,000, which might not be unreasonable given overtime pay and so forth, and I had to pay some of that back. Are you familiar with that? Can you talk us through a little of that?
Well, yeah, just very generally, Merrill, for sure. The fact of the matter is, if you got a subsidy from the government for your health care and your income rises above a certain level unbeknownst to you, guess what? You got to pay it back. I mean, that's the simple answer. It creates a liability in favor of the government that you have to pay back. Now, the thing that the CARES Act changed, it was not the CARES Act. It was the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that took effect in January of 2018. That changed the requirement for the penalty for not having insurance. Okay, so that penalty is gone. Except the Biden administration, I expect them to put that penalty back in place, frankly, and they haven't come out exactly and said they're going to do that, but they did come out and say they want to repeal the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Well, if they do that, that puts the penalty back in place. So they're not mouthing that, but that's exactly what they want to do, is continue to pound Americans who don't have government subsidized health insurance or some other health plan with this penalty. So the short answer to your question is, yeah, if your income rises above a certain level, you're going to have to pay that back. And if there's penalties associated with that, you need to understand, every American needs to understand that penalties can be canceled for reasonable cause. If you didn't deliberately disregard IRS rules and regulations, if the failure to pay, for example, is due to some hardship circumstance, then the penalties do not apply. Now, so that's something that people need to keep in mind, and this is true across the board, Merrill. It doesn't just apply to an increased tax liability attributable to this subsidy that's got to be recaptured. It applies to anything. We talked about before the break. We talked about folks that haven't paid taxes on their unemployment compensation. If they end up owing money to the IRS is going to apply penalties, and you need to understand that you can get those penalties canceled based on a showing of reasonable cause and hardship.
If you want to ask Dan Pilla a question, we're coming up on our last segment, 1-800-351-1212. If you have a question or comment for Dan, 1-800-351-1212. Our guest for this hour is Dan Pilla. He is a tax expert that's been doing this for many years and been on Point of View a number of times. If you want to reach out to him individually, taxhelponline.com is his website, taxhelponline.com. A number of you as small businesses are probably struggling right now. We've seen so many of them closing. That probably raises a number of tax issues for you. Dan has written a book on that for small businesses, so he would be a good source for you if you want to reach out to him. When we come back, Dan, I want to talk about what kind of tax increases you think the Democrats are going to try to push through now with all this spending they're wanting to do. They're going to come up, I think, and say, now we've got to raise taxes to pay for the spending. So stay with me. When we come back for our last segment with Dan Pilla, we'll talk about possible tax increases. We'll be back in just a minute.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back. Merrill Matthews sitting in for Kirby Anderson, and with me in my final segment with Dan Pilla, a tax expert. And Dan, before we go to what type of new taxes we might be looking at, let's go to Bob in North Carolina. Bob, you're on the air.
Hey, Dan.
Hi, Bob.
Hello. My question was, if you haven't received your stimulus check, a couple, I think it was $1,200 per couple.
Mm-hmm.
I know a lot of people who have and not receiving it yet. Somebody told me that if you don't receive it, you'll just file as a tax credit on your taxes. Can you clarify that?
Good question.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Bob. I alluded to that with our earlier caller. There's a worksheet in the tax preparation instructions called the Recovery Rebate Credit Worksheet. And this is a worksheet where you go through and you answer a bunch of yes or no questions that walks you through the process. And then when you're done with the worksheet, the bottom line is that you get X dollars as a credit on your tax return. It goes right on the 1040 form in the same area of the tax return where other payment credits show up. So if you're a wage earner and you add wage withholding, that's a credit. If you're a self-employed person and you made estimated payments, that's a credit. If you're entitled to the child tax credit or the earned income credit, those are credits, right? And they show up as in the form of payments. And so that's how the economic impact payment, the recovery rebate, will be treated on your tax return. If you don't get the money, it'll show up as a credit on the 1040 form.
And Dan, that just essentially takes off your tax, dollar for dollar off your tax bill. Is that correct?
That's exactly right, Merrill. And the important point about what you just said is dollar for dollar. It's not like a tax deduction, which has only a marginal benefit. It's dollar for dollar.
Bob, does that answer your question?
Yes, sir. And let me ask you this. Is it just that this COVID's got them all backed up and they can't get to it or do it fast enough? Because I know a lot of people, even my last name is way up in the alphabet near the end, so I don't know how they do it alphabetically or what.
Well,
they do,
I guess mechanically I don't know how they do it either, Bob. I couldn't answer that. But I can tell you this, the IRS is still in a world of hurt administratively from the shutdown. Remember, they were closed down, too, for about 7-8 weeks, at least 6 weeks, 6-7 weeks anyway, last summer into April, into August, really. And so it started in April, I should say, and into August is when they were shut down till. And I believe from the information that I have from the sources that I have, there's still about 75% of these people IRS people that are working from home. So it's not, by no means is the IRS functioning normally today.
Thank you, Bob. Let's go to see if we can get it. Okay. Yeah, Janet. Janet, you're on the air.
Good afternoon. Hi, and thanks for having the tax gentleman on today. My question is, my husband is a company truck driver, and I know because of the Jobs Cares Act of 2017, the taxes and everything changed for company drivers. But I was told, and I just want to be verified, that because of all of the COVID and expenses, everything that the drivers are going through, our cleaning supplies and things that are related that has to be bought out on the road, are those tax deductible? And if they are, would you follow?
Let's get clear. Okay, let's just get clarification here. Is he an employee or is he considered an independent contractor, self-employed?
No, he's an employee.
All right, if he's an employee, then what we're talking about here are miscellaneous itemized deductions. This is one of the greatest sources of confusion right now going on in America, and it relates to home office expenses. So many people are forced to work from home, they now automatically think that they can write off a home office expense. That's not true. Yeah, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act eliminated miscellaneous unreimbursed employee business expenses as a deduction in exchange for doubling the itemized the standard deduction. So the answer is those expenses are not deductible. However, you need to have your husband talk with his employer about reimbursing the expenses, because if the employer pays the expenses, they're tax deductible. And then reimburses them to the employee, right? Then they're tax deductible to the employer. They're not income to the employee. If the employee pays them, they're considered miscellaneous itemized deductions, and they're not deductible.
Okay. And my other concern is when he was in the hospital up in Illinois, and I had to go out there, and the 10 days that I was there, I was not allowed to be able to stay at the hospital because of COVID. My expenses that I had to get a room with, are those deductible?
Yeah, medical expenses are deductible, but medical expenses have to exceed 7.5% of your adjusted gross income. And so you're going to have to add those into all your other medical expenses, and you only get the deduction to the extent that exceeds that percentage of your gross income, your adjusted gross.
Thank you, Janet. Let's take one more quick question here. Carol, you and Ohio, you're on the air.
Hi, this is Carol Parsley, Cincinnati, Ohio, and I do art shows around the country. and all of the art shows were canceled last year. And when they did that, they sent me, I'd already paid them money. They sent me that money back. And do I have to claim that money as income? It's like
heavens no, Carol. No. Yeah, no, heavens no, Carol. That's not income. The refund of an expense that you paid is not income to you unless you deducted the expense in a prior year. So, for example, if you paid your registration fee in 2019 for a 2020 show and you claimed the deduction in 2019, then the refund would be, and you received the refund in 2020, then it would be taxable. But if you paid the fee in 2020 and then got the money back, it's not income and it's not a deduction. It's just a wash at that point.
And I just get to keep that money?
Well, of course, it's your money.
I don't have it. Okay, great. Listen, you're really helping out a lot because, yes,
right,
I get no art.
Carolyn, I'm sorry to step on you, dear, but I will say this. As a small business person, you would do yourself a great favor by getting my book, Dan Pilla, Small Business Tax Guide.
There we go. Thank you, Carol. Dan, we don't have much time left, but just take about 30 seconds to discuss any tax increase concerns you have from the Democrats.
Well, I'll just bullet point a couple of things here, Merrill. First of all, they want to repeal the entire Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which is going to compound businesses heavily because we will lose the deduction for qualified business income. They want to make massive changes to the real estate tax rules, Merrill, that are going to increase capital gains taxes and eliminate deductions for real estate investors. It's not going to be a pretty sight, in my opinion.
I agree with you there. I think it's going to be hard for them to get it through, but you never want to underestimate their ability to be able to pass a tax hike.
Yeah, no question about that.
Thank you, Dan Pilla. My guest this hour has been Dan Pilla, tax expert. If you want to find out more about Dan, you can go to his website, taxhelponline.com, or you can go to pointofview.net. Dan, thank you so much.
My pleasure, Merrill. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Well, that was interesting at a time where we're going to be looking at a lot of tax issues with people who have lost income, people who have gained income, people who have gotten income from the stock market. So it's going to be a challenging time for a number of people as they go through their taxes. When we come back, we're going to go to Jim Denison. He is the CVO of Denison Forum, and he wants to talk a little bit about media censorship and some of the problems there. I believe we're going to have a piece that he is concerned about up online, and then after him, Jonathan Saenz, and we're going to be talking there about ban the Bible bills in Texas. He's got a list of ban the Bible bills. We want to find out more about that. So this is Merrill Matthews sitting in for Kirby Anderson. Stay with us. We're going to be coming back in a few minutes, and we'll take up some issues about media censorship and Christians and what Jim Denison has his concerns about that. So stay with us. We'll be back in just a minute on Point of View.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I've recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, your guest host for Point of View.
And welcome back to Point of View. This is Merrill Matthews sitting in for Kirby Anderson today. And we're going to change focus right now. We're going to go to Jim Denison, who is the CVO of Denison Forum. He has his daily article and podcast globally reach over 200,000 subscribers. Dr. Denison guides readers to discern today's biblical news, and he is concerned about media censorship. He is a graduate of Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, where he got a Master's of Divinity, as did I from Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. Jim, thank you for joining us.
Hey, Dr. Matthews, glad to be on with you today. Thanks for the privilege.
So tell us, what is your concern about media censorship right now?
Yeah, thanks for asking. A couple of examples, actually, that set this up. One, I guess I just found today. You and I know we're familiar with Ryan Anderson's work relative to transgender issues, entitled When Harry Became Sally, has been really kind of a go-to resource for a long time. Well, I just discovered that's not available on Amazon. They have simply taken it down. You cannot order it off Amazon as of today. Now, you can order Mein Kampf. In fact, it gets 4.5 stars. You can order Ted Kaczynski's Unabomber Manifesto from Amazon. That also gets 4.5 stars. But you can no longer order Ryan Anderson's book on transgenderism on Amazon. That's as of today's news. Just the latest example of the trajectory that we're discussing today.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but my recollection is that Walmart had stopped selling it as well, and then there were complaints about that. And at any rate, one of the organizations that had stopped selling it began to say, "Okay, we understand. We're going to bring this back in, and allow people to buy it there." So, if you're trying to buy the book, how do you find it?
I would imagine you'd have to get it from the direct publisher, would be my guess. There'd be a variety of other ways to do it, I suppose, but it wouldn't be Amazon, because they've made the arbitrary decision. They're simply not going to make it available.
Why do you think they're targeting groups and individuals, Christians, who are, in many cases, they're just talking about science and other issues that are in the public square?
You would think that would be the conversation, wouldn't you? It would be about science and other issues, but there's a larger trajectory at work here that I think it's really important for us to understand. I can illustrate it kind of like this. I have been for a very, very long time extremely opposed to racism, as all believers are or should be, I would think. I'm opposed to racism in all of its forms. If somebody refused to marry a couple because they were of a different race, I would be opposed to that. If someone tried to so-called convert someone out of their race to a different race, obviously we would be aghast and be opposed. Well, our culture is increasingly seeing our biblical position on LGBTQ issues as though we were racist. They see trying to so-called convert somebody out of a same-sex attraction would be like converting someone out of their race. They would see my unwillingness to conduct a same-sex wedding as though I were unwilling to conduct a wedding among two Asians or African Americans or whatever. So they see us as being as dangerous to the culture as if we were members of the KKK. They see us as dangerous to society, and they're responding accordingly.
And I've seen writings on this as various people, and this was a former head of the U.S. Civil Rights Commission. He's not there anymore, but he published a paper, I'm thinking is about 5 years ago or so, where he essentially said that what was happening was that people evangelicals and others who step up and say, we disagree with homosexuality or something of that nature, they essentially were just bigots who were using their religion as a way to promote their bigotry. So in that sense, their religious belief was simply a shield for them to promote what is really a bigotry that they have inside.
And that's what more and more people believe all along. That's why the so-called Equality Act that's already passed the House, and if it passes the Senate, President Biden says he'll sign it, is so dangerous because it elevates LGBTQ protections to civil rights, protected class status, and without any kind of recourse to the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. What that would mean would be if the so-called Equality Act becomes law, Baylor University Medical Center, where I work in medical ethics, would be forced to conduct sex transition surgeries. If you're part of, let's say, a Catholic adoption service, you'd be required to adopt a child to a same-sex couple. If your church rents its facilities to the public, you'd be required to rent them for a same-sex wedding with no recourse to the Religious Freedom Restoration Act because they're claiming that's religious bigotry that we should not be able to so-called hide behind. That's the trajectory of the culture.
You know, this goes on. It has gone on for some time. I recall back when I was at Southwestern, and this was in the late 70s. One of the professors mentioned that some people from the government, I don't remember who he was talking about at the time, was going to come by and visit the seminary, and they were pressing the seminary to hire certain people. And as I recall, the seminary said, well, we can't do that biblically. And they said, well, if you don't do that, we're going to cut all the federal funds that you're getting. And the professor said, we responded by saying, if you find any federal funds at the seminary, you're welcome to them because we don't get any. But there are various types of ways that they can use leverage to try to force these various things. And I can imagine for a lot of schools and so forth that may get a lot of federal funds, that could be a real challenge for them.
Oh, on several levels. I'm on the board of Dallas Baptist University, for instance, where federal funding relative to some scholarships is very much a part of what students require in order to be able to go to school. You think about NCAA restrictions. They could come along tomorrow and ban our baseball team from NCAA participation unless we amended our student handbook to allow for same-sex behavior and so forth. And so there's a whole variety of levels. You're thinking about transgender bathrooms and about individuals being able to access showers that are not their biological sex, and just a whole variety of issues that are in play now. You're thinking about biological men competing with women in sports and not only winning, but being able to take the scholarships that those girls would otherwise have had access to for college. And so just a whole host of issues that are now in play, unfortunately. But your concern in large part is the media being able to censor Christian views. Is that correct? That was the part of the article that we were discussing here today. I wrote on this back at the beginning of February. The previous month, Focus on the Family publication called The Daily Citizen tweeted that President Biden's nominee for Assistant Secretary of Health, Rachel Levine, is, quote, a transgender woman that is a man who believes he is a woman. Twitter locked the magazine out of its account for making that statement. In related news, Facebook blocked a professor at Houston Baptist University for disagreeing with President Biden's executive order allowing trans-identifying individuals to serve in the military. I thought it was interesting that Princeton professor Robert George, one of the best-known voices in the culture, condemned Facebook's attack on that professor, made the statement, censorship on Facebook and some other social media has now gone way beyond the bounds of the reasonable. He stated people need to be able to criticize and forcefully challenge ideas, including ideas that are dominant in elite sectors of the culture and among people in the tech industry. What we do not need, he wrote, is the silencing of dissent. And he warned, once it starts and becomes normalized, things do not end well. I'm afraid he was exactly right. I think that's right. We're going to take a break. When we come back with Dr. Jim Denison, we'll go into what he thinks we should be doing. If you want access to that article, you can go to pointofview.net. We have a link to that on our page. And you have more information and a way to reach out to Jim Denison and to the Denison Forum. So stay with us. We'll be back with Dr. Jim Denison.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
What are the key components of the free enterprise system in America today? Arthur Brooks, in his book, The Battle, describes 5 principles. The first principle is the purpose of free enterprise is human flourishing, not materialism. In this statement, he sets forth the moral case for free enterprise. He argues in one chapter that people flourish when they earn their own success. It's not money per se that's a measure. Instead, it's what Arthur Brooks called earned success. A second principle is that America stands for equality of opportunity, not equality of income. Arthur Brooks has found that non-Americans will tell you that Americans are the most egalitarian people in the world. Most of us believe that we should have similar opportunities, but also believe that we might end up in different places. A third principle is that we seek to stimulate true prosperity, not treat poverty. Arthur Brooks says that nearly every study of impoverished communities around the world show that prosperity, not poverty, is the right focus if we want to lift people out of poverty. A fourth principle is that America can and should be a gift to the world. Here is where we see a split in values. While some Americans see America as exploitative, most Americans believe that our country does more good than harm. And moreover, they believe that the nation has been a force for good in the world. And a final principle is that what truly matters is principle, not political power. Americans reject the pursuit of political power at the exercise of principle. Confidence in politicians in America is now as low as it was during the era of Watergate. You know, Arthur Brooks in his book explains how we can make the case for the free enterprise system, and these are key principles that we need to promote. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back. Merrill Matthews sitting in for Kirby Anderson today. And on the phone with me is Dr. Jim Denison, and we're talking about media censorship of evangelicals and their message. And the article that he recently published is Censorship Escalating Against Evangelicals, ? 3 biblical responses. So Jim, let's start in and kind of touch base with, I think most of our listeners are going to say, yes, it is escalating. What are the responses for that?
Yeah, the first thing we need to do, obviously, something we have to keep retelling ourselves, I have to keep reminding myself, is that we have to respond in love. God loves all people, whatever their sexual orientation or gender identity. We are beggars helping beggars find bread. We are all broken sexually. We are all sinners. And so we respond to this not with a spirit of elitism, not with a spirit of superiority, but with the spirit of humility that says that we are just like everybody else. It's just we found hope that we now want to offer you. We have to speak the truth in love, as Ephesians 4:15 says. Then second, and that is kind of a counterpoint, we at the same time have to speak the biblical truth with clarity and with grace. It's vital that we speak up and that we defend our truth. We're commanded by Scripture, as you know, to defend our truth. But then third, we have to be willing to pay the price of our convictions. Jesus said, "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. Theirs is the kingdom of heaven." I can tell you, having been to Cuba 10 times, that my Cuban friends are facing persecution we don't know anything about in the United States. When I was in Beijing, I met underground church pastors who had persecution stories that ours pale by significance to. So let's decide we'll pay the price of our convictions, whatever that cost might be.
My guest now is Dr. Jim Denison with the Denison Forum, and we're talking about his article, Is Censorship Escalating Against Evangelicals? If you want to read that article, we have a link to it at pointofview.net, and you can find out more about it. You know, Jim, the escalating process here that over the years has just amazed me. At one point, you had, say, for instance, I'll just pick one group, the homosexual community, said you need to be willing to accept us, and then it went on to you need to be willing to well, first it was tolerate, then accept. Now it's almost affirm, and if you're not willing to accept everything that goes on there and the principles and beliefs behind it, then you become a bigot. And even though I suspect many of us as evangelicals, there are groups out there that have different practices, different beliefs. We understand that, but that doesn't mean we have to agree with you. But just the fact that you disagree now becomes evidence of bigotry.
It really does. Back again to the racism example, well, you and I would say that there isn't a tolerance position relative to a KKK member wanting to burn a cross in somebody's front yard. We would absolutely disagree. That we would call that abhorrent on every level. Well, that is, quite frankly, how they see us, tragically. They don't see us as people that love others and want to share God's love with them, and we believe that God's word is best for them, LGBTQ individuals included. They see us as prejudiced and homophobic and bigoted, and they believe they're standing up for society, not just for LGBTQ individuals, 4.5% of American public, but for the larger public as well, against this growing escalation, they would say, of dangerous immorality that's coming from our religion. That really is the way a lot of people look at us today, unfortunately.
And the challenge, I think, is that many millennials, younger people, come up and they just instinctively embrace this argument. And so those of us who at least raise concerns and are willing to have a serious debate about it, we're becoming a smaller minority, it seems to me.
That's true. And as a result, the temptation is to pull back. Temptation is to withdraw from the culture, to only be with people that we agree with people that we know will affirm us and our beliefs. But that keeps salt in the salt shaker. That keeps light under the bushel basket. The enemy would love us either to give up our convictions or to withdraw from sharing our convictions. Either of those is a win for the enemy. So what we have to be doing, as hard as it is engaging with people who disagree and see this as an opportunity. If we respond to hate with love, if we respond to oppression with prayer, if we pray for those who persecute us, we're demonstrating the difference Jesus makes in our lives, and we're showing them the difference he can make in their lives as well.
You know, it's interesting, though, 20, 30 years ago, you could have these debates with people. You could sit down and discuss it, and you could walk away friends. You disagree on some points, but you could walk away friends. Increasingly over the past, I would say 5, 6, maybe 10 years, but at least in the last 5 or 6 years, many of these discussions become violent. If you disagree, people are willing to become much more aggressive toward you, it seems to me.
It seems to me that that's the case as well. We're at a place right now where there's an entrenched belief that you are wrong, you are dangerous, and you're dangerous across the board. If you disagree on this, you would disagree on that, whether it's abortion, whether it's euthanasia, whatever the issue in the culture might be. If you disagree, you're dangerous. There was a day when religion was central to the culture, then it became peripheral to the culture, kind of a hobby for Sunday, but that you're not allowed to bring into your work on Monday. Now it really is seen as dangerous. There's an atheist named Richard Dawkins who says religion is a virus in the software of humanity that must be expunged. And
the thing that's changing here is that because they see an evangelical as so wrong, and they're need to be able to change that, even sometimes through aggressive or violent actions, then they almost see themselves as moral in attacking, hurting, or damaging somebody else who disagrees with them.
They believe they've taken the high road.
Yes.
They, again, back to the racist position, they see themselves the way you and I would see ourselves if we were abolitionists back in the 19th century. If we were willing to pay the price to stand up against slavery, willing to stand up against racism, if we saw ourselves like a William Wilberforce who was crusading against slavery, that really is the ethos that many have, whether it's abortion, whether it's euthanasia, and especially LGBTQ issues. And for the first time in American history, religious freedom, religious liberty is seen as a threat to liberty. We've never been there before, and that's what we're facing now.
If we challenge this, will the courts be on our side, do you think?
That's the great question. The hope is that with the Equality Act, for instance, we know that will be legislated. We know that will be litigated. And at some point, the courts are going to be forced, I think, to come to a broader finding than so far has been the case. Whether it was the Masterpiece Cake Shop or other findings to this point, they've been very narrowly decided on specific grounds that were not really applicable across the larger trajectory of the culture. At some point, the courts will have to decide if, for instance, a Catholic adoption agency can restrict according to their faith beliefs, or a faith-based hospital can practice according to its faith beliefs, or if its doctors will be required to perform abortions or sex change surgeries. At some point, that will have to be litigated.
What's your how optimistic are you? Or do you think we're fighting a losing battle here, or do you think we can win?
I think it's too soon to know that. But I do believe that we have enormous grounds on legal perspective alone to have optimism. Part of the reason for this, and I know this sounds strange to say, is biology is on our side. The science is on our side. It is a fact of biology that people, there's 1 in 1,000 that are born with a kind of intersex condition where the genitalia might on some level not be entirely male or entirely female. But for the other 999, it's clear biologically that individuals are born as male or female. It's clear that 85 to 90% of adolescents with gender dysphoria settle into their so-called assigned gender if they're allowed to do so. The facts, the statistics, the science are very clearly on our side, and as we move forward with this, that provides hope in a secular jurisprudence context where our religious convictions can't come to play, but scientific principles can.
In a final minute here, tell us, will it make a difference which state we live in? Living in Texas, we get lower taxes, we get lower cost of living, and we also have more freedom-loving people here. Will that make a difference, or do you think this will? I assume this will sort of be a national aspect, but I'm wondering if we'll be able to find some refuge in different states.
I think we will, and then places within those states. You look at Texas as a red state, for instance, but Austin's very blue. Houston is blue. Dallas is blue, if you think of blue and red, whereas Midland, where I used to pastor, is very much more of a red area, more conservative area. So I do think that's what we're going to see, is more congregating around sociology, as it were. And we're going to see less and less kind of cross-pollinization. In my mind, as much as I understand that, I think that's dangerous. Mm-hmm. I think the kind of conversation across these kinds of lines, these kinds of beliefs, is critical to our future, and I'm hoping we can resist that to some degree, even though I think it is inevitable.
My guest for this past 30 minutes has been Dr. Jim Denison of the Denison Forum. If you want to find out more about the Denison Forum or Dr. Denison, you can go to pointofview.net, and we'll have information to reach out to him. We also have a link to his article there about the escalating efforts to censor Christian thoughts and so forth, so you can find that and take a look at it there. Dr. Denison, thank you so much for joining us.
What a privilege to be on today with you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. And when we come back from the break, we're going to go to Jonathan Saenz. He is with Texas Values. He's president of Texas Values. And we're going to be talking about ban the Bible bills that are being introduced in Texas. And these may carry over to other states. So I'll be interested to ask him, is this something we're facing in Texas, or is this around the country? Stay with us. We'll be back on Point of View in just a minute.
Sometimes I think about seeds. You ever stop to consider that some seeds become entire trees and some trees grow up and produce fruit? Other seeds become flowers or vines that bring us vegetables or berries. And some trees don't have fruit, but they're just pretty, especially in some parts of the country when it comes to the fall colors. Yes, sometimes my mind goes off like that. And I also think about such things when it comes to the seeds that so many have planted in the quest to impact our nation through Point of View Radio. You may think that your gift is a small thing, but like a seed, it can grow to have an impact beyond your imagination. If you want to see beauty again in America, consider planting a seed today and making a difference by joining the Point of View Truth Team. Get the details today, right now, by visiting pointofview.net/team or call us at 1-800-347-5151. Plant a seed for a great future. Cultivate truth. pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, your guest host for Point of View.
And welcome back. This is Merrill Matthews with the Institute for Policy Innovation, sitting in for Kirby Anderson today. And we're going to stay on the issue of evangelicals, the Bible, and so forth, and look at ban the Bible bills in Texas. Our guest for this final segment is Jonathan Saenz. He is the president of Texas Values. That's a nonprofit group dedicated to preserving and advancing a culture of family values in the state of Texas. Prior to joining Texas Values, he headed the Austin branch of the Liberty Institute, and he is a graduate of the University of Texas at Austin, where he got his undergraduate degree, and the University of Houston Law Center, where he got his law degree. Jonathan, thank you for joining us.
It's great to be with you.
I was looking over your list of these ban the Bible bills in the state. I mean, this is a long list. They're both House bills and Senate bills. Tell us, what is a ban the Bible bill?
Well, if you want more information about this, you can go to the website nobibleban.com, nobibleban.com. These are bills that effectively would make it illegal for you to have the Bible as a part of something that you think is important as an individual, as a parent, as an adult. And what we see happening is people that disagree with biblical values on sexuality and marriage and things of that nature, they want to punish people of faith for having these values when it comes to sexuality, marriage, pro-life issues, and things of that nature by creating new protected classes in state law based on sexual orientation and gender identity. And if you don't support those type of ideologies or beliefs, you can get punished. And I'll give you an example. If you're a Christian counselor, it's not uncommon that you as an adult or maybe you as a parent might come in there and want to talk to your Christian counselor about something you're struggling with personally, someone in your family, maybe even your child. And you'd want to talk about what the Bible says on those issues, particularly if it's a private Christian counselor. You might even want to pray and talk about some scripture from the Bible on these issues. What does the Bible say about sexuality, about how we're made? What does the Bible say about marriage? What does the Bible say about life? These pieces of legislation, they would make it illegal. You would be punished, and in some cases, you could go to jail for having biblical beliefs on these issues.
So is the legislation targeted towards the counselor or the person who wants to be counseled? So if I want to go talk to a counselor and I am a Christian and I want to talk from that perspective and I go to a Christian counselor, who is the object of the legislation?
Well, it's both. So because you would not be allowed to have a counselor that could talk about these issues from a biblical perspective. All right. So the counselor would be punished. So there no longer would be counselors that you could go to talk about these issues because they're going to be fearful that they're going to be prosecuted under this type of legislation. And this isn't the first time we've seen it. These type of bills were introduced at the Texas Capitol in 2019. We were able to defeat all of them. We saw it in 2017 as well, but it was much more aggressive 2 years ago. We're seeing even a higher level of aggression and effort in a use, and this is what it is. It's using the government to create new rules and using the government to punish people for their private beliefs in a private setting. This is not about what happens on government property. And so even though it can touch on those issues, it's primarily focused on what people decide to do individually and privately. And so with the Biden administration now in office and in power, that office is very supportive. As a matter of fact, there's something going through federal law called the so-called Equality Act. It does the same thing in a lot of ways. But we have the ability to stop these things at the state level. People can check it out at nobibleban.com. We've already had over 6,000 messages sent to Texas House and Texas Senate members in Austin opposing these pieces of legislation, and that's what we need to do to stop them.
Now, you're talking about a Christian counselor. You mentioned that, or just going to a counselor. But what if I go to my pastor in a private setting, and I want to go talk to my pastor about this, and I want biblical guidance on some particular issue? Can a pastor do this?
Well, you could run into problems as well. I mean, it just depends on what judge you get, and that's really the bigger threat of having these type of issues in state law. You now have some other entity or person that says, well, I will decide whether or not I think this is an issue of sexual orientation, gender identity, elevating those classifications to a level of race, religion, and things that historically are protected in federal law, but they're subjective. And that's the problem. How are you to know by looking at someone or by not having met someone, what their sexual orientation is, how they identify, they get to decide that issue themselves. It could be different from one day to the next, and you could be punished for something you have no idea exists, or you could be punished just for verbally stating what your particular beliefs are on those issues. And that is the goal of a lot of people that support and push and try to have these laws passed, is they want Christians to be punished. They don't want there to be anyone in society that is able to say something that goes along with the biblical beliefs of sexuality, because it then is something that they disagree with. And so they can't, they don't want to allow there to be these natural disagreements that we often sometimes have when it relates to issues of the First Amendment. They want people that they disagree with and don't support their ideology to be punished.
Now, you raised the issue of a protected class. I'm aware of what that is, but I'm not sure all our listeners are. Explain what you mean by a protected class.
Well, historically, we have things such as race, religion, nationality, where we've seen a long-standing trend of people that have been treated unfairly, and a lot of times it's by the government. The government has mistreated them. We see these issues in race, and as a matter of fact, where these things come up are in the civil rights movement, in these laws from 1964, where you had a long-standing history of people treated unfairly in really unspeakable ways a lot of times, and to where they were limited in a lot of ways from getting a job, from doing things that many of us need to do in order to live our lives day to day. And so that's where these issues have come up. And usually they're characteristics that the person is born with that are immutable in many ways. They can't change from one day to the next what they feel about themselves. It's a part of them and a part of their identity, and it's very clear and established. And so you have them now trying to elevate these things to the same issue of race, where we don't see these type of widespread discrimination. We don't see these immutable characteristics. What we see is people sometimes from one moment to the next or over a certain amount of time deciding to be one way or another, and then not wanting anyone to disagree with those type of issues.
This sort of came up, I'm thinking, about 5, maybe 6 years ago, but maybe 5 years ago, when Charlotte, North Carolina passed legislation, which, if I remember right, was going to say transgender people could use any restroom they wanted to, allowing then, say, a transgender woman, a man who identifies as a woman, to go into a female restroom and vice versa. And that became an issue in North Carolina. Then we picked it up here in Texas, and it became an issue at the legislative level here in Texas, too, didn't it?
Well, it started actually before that. It started with local government passing laws on the issues of sexual orientation and gender identity. So
right, that was Charlotte, North Carolina, in the one place.
Yeah, there was a city in North Carolina that passed a law that elevated sexual orientation and gender identity to the same level of race. That's what the city of Houston tried to do.
Right.
Voters voted those down and said that we don't support that, because that's going to pit people of Christian faith against people on these other ideology issues, and someone's going to lose, and we don't think that that's fair. And it would have forced people. It would have forced private businesses to allow men into women's restrooms. It would have forced men to be allowed into women's shelters, nonprofit places where women that are trying to get away from domestic abuse are looking for safety. Now they've got to lay and sleep next to a biological man. So at the state level, we said, we're not going to do that. We're going to allow private businesses to decide on their own how to handle those issues.
And the legislature got involved as well, did it not? I mean, the state legislature started looking at whether or not there needed to be state legislation in that regard.
That's correct. In Texas, we worked on a law that would have said private businesses cannot be forced by the government to handle these issues that they disagree with. They get to decide on their own how these issues were handled. And on public property, there will never be a situation where a biological male can go into the women's bathroom because of concerns that people had on those issues. So we had consistent standards. And there's a legislation that's happening right now that's having to deal with this issue as it relates to women's sports. And so those are the problems that are created when you have leftist ideology try to use the government to force people to think all of the same way. And that's what's happening with these ban the Bible bills, and that's why we're opposing them.
When we come back for our final segment with Jonathan Saenz, he is the president of Texas Values, we'll continue our discussion about these ban the Bible bills. He's got a list of about 10 as I see them, some in the House, some in the Senate. We'll get him to run through some of the points of those and let us know what we can do about addressing those issues. So stay with us. Jonathan Saenz, Merrill Matthews. We'll be back in just a minute.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to our final segment on Point of View today, where our guest is Jonathan Saenz. He is president of Texas Values, and we're talking about ban the Bible bills that he has been tracking. Jonathan, the list that you have has about 10 legislative bills on there, some about half in the Senate, about half in the House. Tell the listeners where they can find access to that list, and do you see one or two of these bills as having a better chance than others, or some that one or two of them that you think may very well pass?
Well, first of all, if you want more information about the ban the Bible bills in Texas, go to nobibleban.com. That's the main website where you can find the pieces of legislation that are of substantial concern on these issues. And, look, I mean, it's hard to say which ones are going to have the most likelihood of getting passed. And so I hope that none of them do. And so on txvaluesaction.org, our main website, You can also see a list of these bills in the action alert where we've talked about the concerns that we have on these issues. But the one that relates to the Christian counselor, I think, is probably of most concern, if I had to put it that way, because you truly would take the Bible out of the hand of the Christian counselor by not allowing him or her to use that as a resource during a counseling session. Mm-hmm. And we've already talked about examples of that. And I'm sorry, it's on our main website, txvalues.org, and you can see a list of these bills. And so I'm trying to go to the list here to see, I think it's Senate Bill 97 and House Bill 407 are those main bills. And so I think in some of these bills, there's a penalty of $100 per day fine. Those things could start to add up a lot. But when you start having the government punish private Christian counselors for using the Bible, preventing them from using the Bible to talk about issues of sexuality because they say that we were made as male and female and that marriage is between a man and a woman, the government has gone too far. And that's what some leftists want the government to do. We're not going to allow that on our watch, and people can help us by emailing and contacting their state legislators and asking them to say no to the ban the Bible bills.
That's a good point, because my next question was going to be, are there two or three elements that most of these bills have in common, and who are the leading? Because I think they're all led by Democrats. Is that correct?
Now, there is one Republican that we're hearing is supporting one of these pieces of legislation, Todd Hunter, but the main authors are Democrats throughout. Yes. So,
are there a few common ingredients in these things, and who are the lead sponsors of it?
Yeah, there are. They all have the word sexual orientation, gender identity together, and they're trying to put them in our state law at a level with issues of race and religion and national origin. And we don't have things like that in our state law at this point because of how they're used to punish Christians. Look at some of the main bill authors on this. You can see this on the list that we have on our website. The main author, one of the main authors is the chair of the LGBT caucus, and that's Jessica Gonzalez. She's supposed to be filing a bill this week that's really over the top. But some other members are Senator Jose Menendez, Representative Ana Hernandez, Diego Bernal, and Representative Julie Johnson, Representative Michelle Beckley. They're some of the ones that are filing these ban the Bible bills.
I've done this a long time. Legislation that's running through one state oftentimes finds its footprints in other states as well. Are you aware of other states where something like this is going on, or have some other states passed similar legislation, or do you know?
Yeah, some other states have passed these type of pieces of legislation already, and many of the others are trying. And there's a bill going through Congress right now called the Equality Act that's trying to do the same thing at the national level. So we could have a national ban the Bible bill, and that vote could be happening this week. So we are asking people at the federal level, at the congressional level, to ask your member of Congress to oppose the Equality Act. There's nothing equal about it.
When the legislation, when the issue arose in Texas and became prominent, I think 2 or 3 years ago, and Houston was looking at doing something, I think the legislature was considering various ways to be able to address it. I think a colleague of mine at the Institute for Policy Innovation was asked to testify on that. My sense was that there was some effort to say we need state legislation, which essentially says that a city cannot create a protected class on its own. It needs to be done at the state level. If it's going to be done at all, it cannot and should not be done at the city level.
That's right.
I don't recall anything of that passing. Do you?
No, it didn't pass.
Is anything like that being offered as a alternative, or has the issue it doesn't have as much media attention right now as we were hearing back then? Is it sort of an underlying issue for those who would oppose that ban the Bible approach?
We're always looking for opportunities to limit the power of the local government, because so often they use it to punish people of faith. We're seeing that quite often.
And so for our listeners out there, what would you suggest that they do? I know they can go to your website, texasvalues.org, txvalues.org, but what else would you encourage them to do?
To ask their legislators to support religious freedom protection. those are some of the efforts that we're working on that simply hold the line and make it clear that local governments cannot use these type of things in the school districts and city councils to infringe upon people's religious beliefs, and ask them to support efforts that would stop local governments from continuing these type of efforts.
Are there some Republicans who are taking the lead on this that would be good to reach out to?
Yeah, I mean, people like Scott Sanford has always been a leader on these issues, James Frank, but call the Speaker's office and tell them that, because the Speaker really in a lot of ways is someone who communicates with people across the state. So Speaker of the House is Dave Phelan. People can contact Dave Phelan's office and ask him to oppose ban the Bible bills and to support religious liberty and to support the right of the state to say what type of standards we'll have in place across all 254 counties.
Now, that was a good point because you mentioned the new speaker. He's a new speaker. Many of us do not know him or how he intends to move on this. Do you have a sense as to where he is on this legislation?
Well, from what we're hearing, he wants to support what the members want, and my understanding is the majority of Republicans, and he is a Republican speaker, do not support these ban the Bible bills, and they support religious freedom. So that means that our Speaker of the House, Dave Phelan, should be following in that direction and not doing anything that goes against what the Republican majority has supported.
Yes, and that's not always been the case recently. My guest for this past 30 minutes, Jonathan Saenz. He is president of Texas Values. That is a nonprofit group dedicated to preserving and advancing a culture of family values in the state of Texas. He was, of course, headed the Liberty Institute and their Texas Capitol Austin office. So, Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us.
Great. Love to come back again. Appreciate you.
It's a very good point to make here because Texas is often looked at from other states as to legislation that it's leading. And as I mentioned, all these states watch each other, the state legislators, the governors, and so forth. If a state is doing something that looks like it's very good, they oftentimes, the governor or some of the legislatures will go and pick up those bills and try to adjust it for that state. If a state is doing something very bad, other state legislators may look at that and say, we need to make sure that we aren't doing anything like that. So Jonathan Saenz has got a good organization there with Texas Values, and we'd encourage you to go take a look at it or go to Point of View website. We have more information and contact information for him. So thank you for joining us. This has been Merrill Matthews with the Institute for Policy Innovation, sitting in for Kirby Anderson. And we've had a number of topics today, very interesting, and I appreciate Dan Pilla especially addressing those tax issues. So stay with us. Point of View will be back tomorrow. Thank you for joining us.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.